Hello there, and welcome to the Thank You Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and today I'm joined by Doctors Scott Keith, Rod Rosenblatt, and Adam Francisco. We are back from a long time since we've recorded, actually. So for listeners, it seems like we've been here every week, but we haven't recorded a show since April 9th. That's how sort of ahead we got, and there was a lot of traveling. So we get to sit back down together and record, and we just finished out the History of the Reformation series. And so we're sort of in an in-between. We're actually going to start a series on Christianity in America with Dr. Dan Van Voris, who's going to come on and do 6 episodes with us on that in the near future. But in between here and now, we're going to start doing, Adam had a great idea to do conversations on apologetics, because we did an apologetics series over a year and a half ago now. And in between then and now, we've done only a handful of episodes on apologetics, even though sort of the subtitle of the show is a show on theology, history, and apologetics. It's one of the 3 pillars of the show. And so I thought this was sort of a great way to fill this gap between our next historical series and then be able to do that again in the summer as we come up with ideas. I also recently just had... I don't talk to people on airplanes very often.
No, I understand.
I just don't. But my iPad died. I didn't charge it the night before, sort of foolishly. I ran out of podcasts to listen to on my phone. They hadn't all downloaded. And I was sitting there for the last 45 minutes looking at my phone, and I looked next to me, and somebody was translating something from Japanese into English, and I started a conversation with them, and it turned apologetic in nature, which was very interesting. And so I just recently had sort of an experience like this.
More often than not, it does turn in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
The second somebody asks me what I do, it kind of does.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought the first episode could relate to, so Dr. Francisco and Keith, you guys go and do apologetic gigs actively, and Roger used to do a lot of this and used to teach it at the university. And I think from what I hear you guys talk about, there seems to be a difference between sort of formally knowing everything and then what people take away, or the questions you get asked at a congregation, or what you expect the result of teaching it at a congregation might be. Not necessarily that everybody in that congregation's just going out into the neighborhood and doing sort of like on the street apologetics, but at some level that this might be sort of a comfort to them as they get challenged by things on TV or in the news or by their kids coming home from school or something like that.
Well, we belong to a church that doesn't know what it is because we've never taught our seminarians anything about it except a few years when Adam was at Fort Wayne. It's a zero because if we don't execute it at the parish level, it isn't, and we don't. Other parishes of different denominations wouldn't be as ignorant as ours are, but it's because we don't teach our guys at seminary the importance of it.
Mm-hmm. And I always wonder, we kind of know why that is, because there is almost even a hostility towards apologetics.
Yep.
Which is sort of odd since 18th century.
Yep.
When the theological curriculum was formalized, it's always been part of the theological curriculum alongside ethics and underneath systematic theology.
Yep.
I have a friend at St. Louis Seminary who was in a class with a well-known professor there, and who started off a class by saying he was against apologetics. And then he said for 3 weeks, he went on to explain the historical apologetic for the resurrection of Christ and how this is where our hope lies, and where, if we're going to talk to the world, it was, and didn't know that was apologetics.
He may know that it's apologetics.
There's
some
a
of those
certain
guys
type of apologetics that they're especially reacting to. Types, plural.
And so, you even have some of that, right, where we're going to kind of disagree on the purpose and place, maybe even, or who should be doing or not doing.
It's funny to me because when Adam and I both were undergrads at Concordia, it was such a big part of I'll speak for myself, for my initial influence into learning theology. I mean, it was really part and parcel with it. You learned theology, and that meant you sort of learned reformational theology, specifically Lutheran reformational theology. But then part and parcel with that, you took philosophy courses that taught you how to think, and you taught apologetics courses that sort of, I'd say, tied those things together. It took because you're taking history classes, you're taking history of theology classes, 20th century theology, you're taking philosophy courses, and then it sort of all wraps up into this picture that's apologetics, where all of those things are a part of it. Like what you learn for how to do history is part of that apologetics. What you learn, like how to think and reason in philosophy, is part of that. And so it's bizarre to me in the rest of my education, through master's degree and PhD program, how I didn't do my stuff in Lutheran circles, but still how much a part of the normal, it's not a part of the normal sort of theological world, period. And the takeaway on that for me has always been that I really think there's a lack of ability to reason properly, I guess I would say, in theological circles at all, which isn't even doing apologetics, but it's part of it. And then when people fall into, even in people that are in your camp, when they fall into what I would say, I wouldn't even call it like heterodoxy or heresy, but when they just say dumb stuff,
to use academic descriptor.
You think to yourself, well, that just doesn't even make sense. As Rod would say, that's not right. It's not even wrong. And I think that's really lost because we don't have apologetic conversations. So kind of on the topic of the show.
But imagine somebody, and I've had this happen, and you have too, somebody saying, "Why are you a Christian?"
Yeah, what's your answer to that? Yeah, and I say when I go and teach this at congregations, and Adam and I talked about this quite a bit because we're talking about the idea of doing sort of offering a section together. My favorite part of it is I do this thing called epistemology theology that I actually started when you and I were talking years ago while you were still at Concordia about a gig that you had where you were going to kind of have to do a basic epistemology course. It was years ago at a congregation, and I remember sitting down with you then and sort of mapping this out, and I do it now all the time, and it's my favorite part of going to a congregation to do apologetics, and it's not apologetics proper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is teaching people that really do have a mechanism for working out right and wrong, teaching them to recognize what that mechanism is.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing, and really for me, knowing how to do that came out of learning apologetics.
If I can plug something, we should have on our freebies at 1517 somewhere. He was an evangelical, but we don't have a lot of stuff other than Dr. Montgomery's from Lutheran circles that we can use. And it's called What Non-Christians Ask. It's by Paul Little, who wrote How to Give Away Your Faith and Know Why You Believe. It's a pass out.
Booklet size.
It's 4 pages or something. And Paul, who did the apologetics for Billy Graham in New York and other cities, he would train college students. Paul found that he said, I can predict with 90+% accuracy what questions will be asked of me if I do a presentation at a sorority or a fraternity.
Oh, yeah, I think I could, too.
And he wasn't saying he was so brilliant. He was saying the same questions recur.
There's about 7 of them.
Yeah. And you'll answer them again and again and again and again and again.
They're phrased differently sometimes, but if you sort of drill down on what's being asked, it's sort of the same 7-ish question.
Yep.
Time and again.
And that, if it's available on our site, I'd say take it. There's no cost. Find it and take it.
I think some of it is, and like you said, with even resources like this, is letting go of a pure defense of Lutheranism or something like that, or insert your denomination here. And I run into that a lot. And the funny thing is I don't go in with that mindset, but if you're actually having a conversation with somebody and you're not just talking to them, doctrinal type of questions will come up, which then when you're presenting them as a Lutheran, you don't have to explicitly say, well, the confessions say
Yep.
XYZ. That's not what they're asking. I don't have to make sort of a pure argument for why you should be Lutheran while still sort of presenting that if questions on baptism or questions on justification or something like that come up, which is sort of like you don't have to force the issue. It's kind of issue, but I feel like a lot of stuff from the LCMS that I see now is like why people should be Lutheran.
Yes, definitely. With Craig Parton's book, The Defense Never Rests, I had to fight with CPH pretty intensely because they wanted to relabel it Why I'm a Lutheran.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Huh. And they finally deferred after I yelled at the editor for a while.
Well, it's funny when, and Adam, Adam's got actually a lot more experience on this than I do, but when I now go to, 9 times out of 10, if I'm talking about apologetics, it's because somebody has asked me to come
to do that,
to give a class on it. And it's usually a series of classes, right? It's like a Saturday, and you have 4 different sections to do it on, and when I first was doing this some years ago, I would go in sort of with the assumption that what the church was at, it was like with the assumption say that it was like the evangelism committee at the church bringing me in to teach the people that are going out to do evangelism, how to field common questions or how to be able to make a defense for the reasonableness of Christianity or something. What sort of over the years of doing this, what I've come to realize is that that's not what's happening in these congregations. They're not really bringing me in to equip people that are going out with the gospel. What happens is you get asked to do this, I think, a lot now because so many older people are terrified that their children or grandchildren are out of the faith.
Yeah.
And so I'd say 2 things. One, they're asking because they want to say something to these people that they love and they don't know what to say. And so you get enough of these people together and they're really interested in this apologetics class, but they're really interested in it because they're trying to save somebody they love, which is a whole different dynamic. That's a whole different, maybe the tools, the techniques, and the principles that you're teaching are the same, but the dynamic is completely different. And secondly, when I do this now, if it's a room full of, I'll affectionately say gray hairs, I will very purposely say, that the church, when they have me come out or somebody like me come out, ought to really think about making it sort of a young adult event. Because I would love to talk to 25-year-olds and younger about this, and to give them some tools and some arrows in the quiver for when they go to high school or when they go to college and their faith is challenged.
Absolutely.
And I've said time and time again, I'm not looking to teach these people how to rebut professors because that's in our day and age, that's almost insane. You could fail a class just because you didn't agree with a professor on something, which is stupid, but I think it's totally legitimately possible. But to have, to be able to sit through that class and know that when the professor says you're an idiot if you're a Christian, that it's just not true.
Yeah.
That's just not true. And in that way, maybe down the line, if we can reach enough young people with that, it's just not true.
You won't lose them.
That you're an idiot, and
that's where we lose them.
And that's where you lose them. That's at least one of the significant places where you lose them. Is that the same? Do you find that, Adam?
Yeah. An event a couple months back, I think it was, had maybe 80 people, and then there was a contingency of young adults, 20s, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and the questions were very different from the 2 different demographics. And with the younger people, God bless them. Many of them were there because they were in college or shortly, they had just left college and they're wanting to be able to defend the faith and so on. There's so much, they're so zealous about it, and they don't even know where to get resources on this.
Yep.
And so in many ways, you go in thinking, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, all this high level stuff. And then you realize actually it's about the basic fundamentals.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that
Yep.
fundamentals are like simple minded or anything like that. It's just there is so much need in, I don't know, what do we call them, millennials, or I don't know what the generational breakup is anymore, but for just equipping young Christians to just think apologetically.
Sure.
Let alone do it.
Sure.
When you teach somebody just even the implications of 1 Corinthians 15:17, right? If Christ be not raised, we are of all people most miserable.
Yep.
That the whole thing hinges on the resurrection of Christ. Like if Christ was actually killed, and if he actually rose from the dead, and if he said that, this is how I will show the sort of ultimate way that I will show you that I am God and that I should thus can be trusted and listened to. If you just are able to teach people just that,
it's huge.
It's huge.
Well, and the look on people's faces, that was, I mean, it came around to that with this guy on the plane. It went from questions about translation that I had done, which is how we started talking, to variance, to the word justification, to, what does that mean, to the cross, and to if this didn't happen, Christians shouldn't believe any of this.
Well, and I was going to say,
he was just the face was like, I've never heard anybody question a faith before.
and we say it's not teaching doctrine, but if you teach just 1 Corinthians 15:17 to somebody, it's highly apologetic, right? That's what Paul is saying. But you're also teaching them what Christianity is, which is likely different than what they've heard it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're telling them this is all about the death and resurrection of Christ.
Yep.
Period. Right. And that Paul literally says, if this didn't happen, nothing about this whole thing matters.
Yep.
If this didn't happen, boy, that's something that I guarantee you most Christians don't think is true.
Yep.
Even though it comes right out of the mouth of Paul.
Yep.
I've been in rooms where you teach that, and people,
They get antsy.
Yeah.
I always give a little trigger warning.
Yeah.
I'm about to say something.
Well,
Yeah.
Don't think in your mind you're going to gather a bundle of sticks and put me on a stake and
Sometimes
light it on fire.
Sometimes
Just hear me
it
out here.
seems with Christians on this issue that it's if something, if the resurrection happened, or if people like Pontius Pilate existed, or characters from the New and Old Testament were actual people, that would just be a happy coincidence. That doesn't matter. The Bible says it. That means it's true, and it doesn't matter if any external sort of work of human reason or science or history can say yes, it's true. That would all be coincidence, and sure, maybe he existed, but the way you can detect it in history, but the Bible said it happened. And
Well, we're living in the Western world now where we've moved to anything under the rubric religion is the same as myth or imagination or and to break out of that is not easy.
Do you remember years ago on White Horse Inn, this had to be 95. I mean, this is years ago on White Horse Inn. For about a year and a half, you guys were really hot on pointing out that Christianity isn't a religion.
Yep.
And that stuck with me. But it's so funny. If you say that today, even to other Christians,
people freak out.
they freak out about it.
Yep.
But if you take the fact, and the evidence for the resurrection, and you present it the way that it's presented by Paul and by the Gospels as this stuff happened.
Yep.
You're not presenting a religion. You're not presenting,
Yeah.
at least initially, you're not presenting a list of ideals
Right.
or isms that you have to hold to.
Right.
And everything will be better. You're actually telling a story of things that happen in real time, real space, and real history to a real person that we call Jesus. And that's a whole different ballgame.
Yep.
That's a whole different ballgame that has implications if it's true.
Yep.
Yes.
And those implications, especially if the resurrection is true, those implications are universal because it's conquering the one universal problem of death. I mean, that's not a religion in the same way Buddhism is.
Correct.
You know, it's just not. And that I think too, when you teach that to Christians or your conversation with a non-Christian, that's if they listen. That's hard these days, but if they listen and they hear that, that's a huge.
Well,
People who have sat in a pew for 25 plus years can say to you, I've been in a church for that long and I've never heard this.
Oh yeah.
yes.
And they're telling the truth.
I know somebody pretty well, and I'm not going to give names. And you probably, if you have your powers of deduction are strong, you'll be able to figure out who it is. But somebody I know grew up the daughter of a missionary, the daughter of a seminary president or a seminary professor, the daughter of a pastor, a daughter of a district president, and she told me that when I think it was in your class when she learned that the stuff we speak about actually happened, it had never dawned on her.
Oh, that's
that it was.
interesting.
These were. It's not that.
Yeah.
She was.
No, I get
She thought
that.
these were just stories in the way like mythology, but that wasn't.
Yeah.
She had been taught or was always moving on to better things. Maybe how to live like a Christian,
Yeah,
or whatever
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
And I mean that makes all the difference.
Yep.
That like you said, Christianity is not a religion the way
Yeah.
Others are.
others are. It's a confession or a
Yeah.
Well,
acknowledgement and of something that God did for us in time
Of
and space.
external truth, which makes it
Yeah.
much different than
Yep.
most religions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which are acknowledgments of something I feel internally.
well-
It's an acknowledgement of an external truth that, or at least external truth claim.
True if nobody believes it.
This truth, nobody believes it. And its implications are just as far reaching
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
nobody believes it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not about. I mean, even down to another level, it's not about the external worship either, which is.
No.
I mean,
No.
that's not where the salvation occurred. That's not where the story happened.
Well, think about how far-reaching the statement is that it's true if nobody believes it.
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's an incredible thought.
Well, especially for the young in the Western world today.
Yeah. To somebody say, well, that truth or that doesn't mean anything to me, or that's
Yeah.
not my truth. Well,
Right.
that doesn't change.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The truth of the statement or the implications of that truth, whether or not you hold to it.
Yep. I'm going to kick myself if I don't throw this in. I again recommend Dr. Montgomery's audio series, Sensible Christianity. It was done for the laity. Don't think you have to be clergy or have a degree to understand it. You will understand it. It's a series of audio tapes done in cities throughout the U.S. 20 years ago. And he deals with the basic problems at a very understandable level. You can buy it at $15.17.
I'll also throw in there that I just heard that he has some spots left in his academy because of some cancellation.
Oh, good.
So if Caleb can put the
Yeah, I can
link
put
to
the
the
link.
academy in the show notes, people can check that out. I think he's got several. He's had a couple cancellations. He's got several spots available.
That'd be great.
Which is in the last couple of years been very rare that you would have been able to
Yeah, it's
get
been
in on it.
filling up a year ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so if it was something you were sort of considering or on the fence about, I'll put the website in. You can get a hold of. I would imagine it's Craig Parton who's
Probably.
doing that. So
Good.
What do you go? Let's you and I go.
oh no,
It's hot in Strasbourg. in
It is.
July.
Not always.
That's true. I was there once when it was very nice. The other 3 times I was there.
the last 2 years were warm.
Yeah.
They were warm.
I think I'm at the point in my life now, though, if I were to go, I'd be staying in an air-conditioned hotel.
Let me tell you a little story about my experience with apologetics in the early days. I still remember, this must have been 25 years ago, maybe even more, or maybe around 25. I was in an elevator. This is when I was stationed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and I think I had just come home from church, and I had a Bible in the hand or something, and a guy comes in the elevator that I'd seen around in the barracks, and he asked what I was doing. I said, I just got back from church, and we had a little conversation, and he mentioned he was sort of a Buddhist and something else, and we had this conversation. I had no idea how to
Talk to him.
talk to him.
Yeah.
Fast forward 5 years later, I go to Concordia University in Irvine, and I have this professor that everybody warned me about, Dr. Rosenblatt. And I took this course in apologetics, and I remember it was bizarre. Well, I don't know if it was bizarre, but I just remember thinking one day, wait a minute, you can actually talk about this in a way, or you can suggest or talk about this as if it's true in a normal sense of the term.
Yep.
I remember, I'm an introvert, shy. That changed everything. Mm-hmm. I remember going to, you would never find me at a college campus mixing it up with Wiccans or whatever the heck isms.
Sure.
But that was it. A couple weeks later, there I am. Because, this is actually defensible. And it's not something that you need a degree to do. I was a second year undergraduate. Most Christians actually have the basic equipment. It's just they need to it's about, I think, reordering their thinking about Christianity.
Yeah.
That Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yes, they're Word of God. But maybe we could just start by saying they're good primary source documents on the life of Jesus.
Yeah.
You can build an inductive case for Christianity there.
Yeah.
Historical accounts.
Maybe this is hyperbole, but it is life-changing for the Christian.
I don't think it's hyperbole. I could point to when I first learned this stuff, a couple of things that really they've stuck with me ever since. One, the idea that the resurrection of Christ is not just something that we celebrate once a year, but that's a verifiable historical event. That was, that took it from
religious
to real.
Yep.
Yes, that's a good distinction.
And then I had that backed up in this class that Rod hates that I keep promoting, 20th century theology course, right? And you learn in that class this like bizarre thing that never occurred to you, but you probably experienced as a Christian, that there was this whole segment of theology that one didn't believe any of it to be true, right? The liberals, but a whole nother segment that wanted part of it to be true and started speaking of it in this special kind of language.
Yep.
Once you learn that, you hear that special language everywhere, and it drives you crazy. But you do. And people say it as though it's virtuous, that they're using a different kind of language for this, and often because it's so special and it's so grandiose and it's so salvific or whatever. But
you want to be reverent.
Yeah, you want to be reverent. You want to keep it as the other, and you're thinking, "Holy cow!" But this is the nitty gritty Christ who actually bled and died, and rose again and ate some fish. That was huge. And then I've said it before on the show, the philosophical category that just like changed my life is the idea of synthetic statements.
Yes.
Analytic, synthetic, nonsensical statements. That's to me, that's a game changer. I'm everywhere I go, and if they ask me to do apologetics, I do that because you learn that and you hear the way people speak, and they think they're making statements of fact or of evidence, and they're just not. And this goes from very educated people to not.
Sure.
Redefining terms and things like that.
And not telling you they are.
The benefits of doing, I guess all I'm saying is the benefits of learning some of this, great benefit, right? You learn how to defend your faith, learn how to know that what you believe is reasonable. That's obvious. The not so obvious benefits are they're sort of in the civil world too, where there's some of this that if you learn how to defend the evidence regarding the resurrection, you're actually learning how to defend whether or not evidence can be trusted, and to analyze whether or not any evidence can be trusted. That's beneficial in your life too.
That's beneficial, like in the most basic ways, like buying a used car.
Seriously, it's weird.
You'd know.
I would know. Yeah.
It's weird.
It's
sometimes not beneficial in your marriage, but
another reference I'd like to make in this context is unusual and stands out. It's by Greg Kokel, and it's called Tactics. It's a book, and I think it's available from Zondervan in video too. Greg Kokel, Best of Evangelical, tactics in which he's doing it in a way that is very, very subtle. I can't do it, but it's the use of Socratic questions.
Yeah.
I like it. You can find it at standtoreason.com. I've
Or
been,
on Amazon.
I've been on his show. You've been on his show. Dr. Montgomery's been on his show talking about this stuff. My one critique of tactics would be that there's a lot of it's subtle, but there's a lot of sort of at least possibly a lot of sort of worldview demolition before getting to Christ. In that. And the one thing I've always appreciated about what you and Dr. Montgomery have taught us is it's sort of like what you're doing is a race to the cross. You know,
Yeah.
because again, tactically, you could argue with people about all sorts of things that are
Sure.
probably foundational to getting to the cross, but why not just try to argue for the cross first?
Yes, yes.
You know, and the resurrection first.
Sure,
And go from there backwards to the other thing.
sure.
I mean, it's sort of a flip-flop way of building a building, but that's kind of what Jesus does.
You know, think of an illustration that's very, very common. Someone who thinks the whole Old Testament is just a series of stories.
Right.
If they get to the evidence for who Christ was through his resurrection, then you can go to his view of the Old Testament and say, really? He thought that stuff was true?
Yeah. Well, he speaks like he's
You
in
might,
it.
and
Yeah.
Furthermore, he speaks like it's telling his story.
Yes.
well, and you would use
Moses wrote of me.
Yeah.
you would use that objection as leverage to get to the cross instead, to say, "Oh, that's interesting. That's not how Jesus thought
Yeah.
of it." And you could change the conversation with that to not spend your time arguing about the Old Testament
Yep.
for
Yep.
days, whatever.
Yep.
Years.
Yep.
It's sort of interesting. The cross is so deconstructive on its own about worldviews. The entire idea of resurrection, especially resurrection that like hinges on actually having happened, not just in your heart, or not just for those believers, but universally
Yep.
in
Well,
human history, is shattering.
Let me go back
on
and
its
now
own.
defend what Kokel's done because best construction on what he's doing is he's acknowledging something that I think, I'll be honest, I think Dr. Montgomery needs to acknowledge more, that the conversation has shifted a bit, and that when you're dealing with people who are completely postmodern, it is very difficult to jump into just from zero to verifiable truth claims.
Oh, yeah.
That's not easy. And what Kokel's doing in tactics is saying, in the course of conversation, you know, as you're sort of leading up to that, you can subtly, in a Socratic way, sort of deconstruct their idea that there is no truth.
Yes. And that's, I'm sure, what he's intending.
And that is, you know, I would say that you have to do something like that with younger people in conversations now. You don't have to do exactly that, but you got to do something like that.
Yeah.
I do something like that when I teach this. It's not the same, but it's something like that.
I did that with two Mormons who were coming to. I told them they could keep coming over on Saturdays at this time, and on the third week, they were over, and they finally started asking some meaningful questions because they were only asking me questions. I said, "Fellas, if you're gonna come back here, you gotta have some questions for me too. I'm not just gonna sit here and field this." And it got to sort of their book, the Book of Mormon, and I was like, "So how do you know it's not a fairy tale? Like
Rose-colored glasses.
We feel it when no, literally. It was the whole when I read it, I feel it.
Yeah.
I feel it in my heart, and I just looked at him and I said, you know, I hope for your sake that one morning, you don't wake up and read it and feel nothing.
Yeah.
I said, I really, and I said, I don't think I'm not going to sit here and argue you for days, but you should have a reason.
Yeah.
You should have something concrete.
I bought breakfast.
They never came back.
Yeah, I bought breakfast for a pair of Mormons one time. I said, bring with you everything you've got and give me your best shot. And that was their best shot.
The burning in the bosom.
The burning in the bosom.
That was
Can
what
you
it was.
imagine the poor Mormons who knock on one of our doors?
Oh yeah. They were like, if you'll just read it, you'll. And I was
Let me
like,
use ed specialist speak to go full circle. You've heard that term before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read Greg Koukle's book Tactics years ago, and I was sitting on a plane with a Mormon and his wife. So they're both Mormons, and he identified himself as a Mormon, very very friendly guy, and he's a high priest in the Melchizedek order and lives in, I think, Logan, Utah, and I get a Christmas card from him every year. And I followed Greg's Koukle's method, where you're asking the questions, or where you're asking them questions, so that their worldview, they're the ones who tell you what their worldview is,
Why they believe what they believe.
and we still have email exchanges every once in a while. He's a lawyer, and I always say, "Well, what's the evidence for it?" And he routinely tells me, "While I'm a lawyer and evidence matters, when it comes to religious faith, it doesn't."
Oh my Lord!
And it's. I should probably shake the dust off my feet, but it's
why? Why does it not matter when it comes to the thing that possibly has the most impact on your forever than anything
Well,
else?
because it's not just his own personal thing; it's his whole family, it's his culture.
Sure.
If you crack open that door,
well,
they're risking everything.
I'd
it's
say
the same way with Muslims and Jews.
Yeah,
and
especially
Japan.
Yeah.
Where
Shinto, the whole
you
thing.
shame all the ancestors.
Yeah, this was the guy I was talking to on the plane, and it was interesting because I said, "Yeah, my faith is falsifiable," and he was actually pretty on board. He was like, he's like, "Well, couldn't it got to somehow Jesus in Islam," and I was like, "They make very different claims. Can both of them be right?" And he's like, "Well, not if he really existed. No, they can't." I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "That's right." And he's like, "Whoa, there's something here." I'm like, "Yeah."
These are mutually exclusive statements.
I was like, and I said, and that's every religion in the world. They're all making claims about the same things, and they can't all be right. And he's like, like you could just see it on his face. This is the first time it hit.
It's sort of like we had a mathematician. I don't know if I can name his name, but at Concordia University.
Rod has several times.
Okay, Bob Meyer.
Yeah.
And he would say things like, Christianity is the sort of religion that might not be true. And if you're very religious, like, what?
Yeah.
But his whole point is that this is entirely falsifiable in a way that all religions aren't. But
Can you imagine, though? Yeah, what I would love to do is I'd love to go to a pastor's conference
And say that.
I've said that.
How does that go?
Yeah.
Initially, it doesn't go over so.
Yeah.
I've had people get mad at me that I don't say verifiable. That I'll lean on the falsifiable.
Yeah.
And
No, but just to say,
it's more shocking.
we I don't remember how Bob said it, but we are part of a religion that might not be true.
Yeah, it's conceivable that it's false.
Conceivable that
And
it's
you can
false.
specify how you could do it.
And in a postmodern
And
world,
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing, not a bad one.
in a postmodern world, it is the better move to start with I could be wrong.
I think you're right.
Than to start with we are right.
I
just is.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And there's so many people who have an opposition to the church because they see it as this fist of power and authority. Yeah. Whereas if
and hypocritical at that.
Yeah, and if I found that the conversations are much better if you start from a point of weakness.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think.
Talk about a tactic.
Yeah. I think of St. Paul's words before King Agrippa, Acts 26.
Yeah.
I think it's at verse 26 where he's accused of being crazy, and I forget who it is, Festus or Felix says, "Would you, in so short a time, think that you could convince King Agrippa to become a Christian?" And Paul says, "Well, I wish that everybody here would be convinced, because the things I speak about, namely the death and resurrection of Jesus, did not happen in a corner."
Yeah.
That's the Christian confession, isn't it?
Yep.
These things actually happen. Of course, there's more to it than that, but these things actually happen, and they have
Well, that's what he does.
Christianity is historical in a dual way.
Yes.
You can overthrow Christianity by just historical means, at least in theory, and ask another religion or ask a religion that what factual conditions would have to occur such that you would change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's 1-6, literally lays out so in Acts where he says these things did not happen in a corner. In 1 Corinthians 15, 1-6, he starts naming the people that saw it by name.
Yeah.
And then if you couple that to, where Christ was buried, the address is virtually given in the Gospels, right? In the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. They're literally. I used to give my home address. It's literally like saying, "Go check it out. It's here." He's not there. That is unlike. I'm not even say most other. That's unlike every other religion. That this did not happen. Other religions, even say Islam, that testify regarding Christ, quote unquote. The words given to testify about Christ are given in a corner, right, in secret. Mormonism, these words are given in secret.
Yeah,
right?
literally in a hidden upper room.
Yeah, with a
dividing wall.
Some wall between Joseph Smith and
the Gospels. When you see the red letters in your New Testament in the Gospels, these are people writing down what they heard him say publicly.
Yep.
That is so different. That is when you're able to say that's the word of God. That is so different than any other religion.
Yep.
Well, we're at time unless we have just like a quick word or two for the end of this episode.
We kind of maybe unintentionally made the case for learning some apologetics.
Yeah. I think, I like revisiting the subjects that we've done over and over again. And the more people I talk to, I'm convinced that that's sort of finding these issues that need to reoccur is sort of the thing to do, not just assuming people will stumble across the backlog of episodes or something like that. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for supporting the Thinking Fellows. If you donate to 1517, that helps keep podcast development going. Shows are not free to produce, and we produce quite a few of them, including the Thinking Fellows that you're listening to. If you'd like to check out more podcasts, go to 1517.org/podcasts. And if you are enjoying these, if they have been beneficial to you in any way, please do consider at least a small monthly donation at the 1517 website. It's 1517.org, and there's a red donate button there, and you can make it whatever amount. But recurring donations really do help over the course of a year. All right, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.